Mark and I had been married for 20 years, and for most of that time, I believed we had a good life. We had a beautiful home, a comfortable income, and people often called us the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, things weren't perfect. Mark had grown cold. He stopped looking at me the way he used to, stopped asking about my day, and sometimes wouldn't even come home until after midnight. I told myself it was stress from work, but deep down, I knew something was off. 3 years ago, everything started to change. Mark became more distant, more secretive. He started locking his phone and taking calls outside. When I asked, he said I was being paranoid. I tried to believe him because that's what I always did. I believed in him even when it hurt. But one night, when he claimed to be working late, I drove to his office and saw his car parked outside a small restaurant nearby. Through the window, I saw him sitting with a young woman. She was laughing, her hand on his arm. I froze. My heart sank, but I didn't walk in. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring, until the truth became impossible to deny. That night, I didn't cry. I went home, took a deep breath, and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him right away. I wanted to know how deep his betrayal went. From that day forward, I started watching. I checked his credit card bills, found receipts for hotel stays, and noticed jewelry I never received. I copied everything and kept it in a folder in my closet. He thought I was blind, but I saw everything. Mark had always been careful with money, almost controlling. He handled all the finances, the investments, even the house paperwork. I trusted him completely, until one day, a letter from our lawyer came while he was away. It was addressed to both of us, but he had already opened it and left it on his desk. Curiosity made me read it, and that's when I saw it, a draft of a new will. My name wasn't there anymore. Everything, from the house to the savings account, was left to someone named Sophie Miller. I didn't know who she was, but I didn't need to guess. When he came home that evening, I pretended nothing had happened. I smiled, served him dinner, and listened as he complained about his long day. Every word made me sick, but I stayed calm. Something inside me shifted. I realized he didn't just betray me emotionally. He was trying to erase me completely. He didn't know I had already started preparing. He didn't know I had evidence. He didn't know that the woman he thought he could replace so easily still had one last move to make. I wasn't going to fight him with anger or tears. I was going to wait for the perfect moment, and make sure that when it came, he'd finally understand what it felt like to lose everything. After that night, when Claire realized something was wrong, things between her and Mark grew colder. He started coming home later than ever, sometimes after midnight, smelling of expensive cologne she didn't recognize. His phone was always face down on the table, and he carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. When it buzzed, he would step outside to take the call. At first, Claire tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just work stress or another business deal. But as the days passed, the truth became impossible to avoid. Mark had started lying more often. He would say he was in Chicago for meetings, but Claire found out later his flights were to Miami. He claimed he was too busy for dinner, but his credit card showed expensive restaurant charges for two. Claire didn't confront him right away. She wanted to be sure. One evening, when he said he had a late meeting, she waited an hour, then followed him quietly. He drove downtown and parked outside a cozy little restaurant. Claire sat in her car, heart pounding as she watched him walk in. A few minutes later, a young woman appeared, stylish, confident, smiling in a way that made Claire's stomach turn. She watched as they sat close, laughing, holding hands. The way he looked at her, with warmth and attention, was something he hadn't shown Claire in years. The sight hurt more than she imagined, but she didn't cry. She stayed long enough to take a few photos from her phone, hands trembling the entire time. Then she drove home, numb and silent. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every word, every touch she had seen replayed in her mind like a cruel movie. The next morning, Mark acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed her cheek before leaving for work, pretending everything was normal. Claire forced a smile and let him go. From that day, she decided she would no longer be the trusting wife. She would be careful, quiet, and watchful. She started keeping records, hotel bookings, credit card bills, text messages she managed to glimpse when his phone lit up. Each small detail became a piece of a puzzle she was slowly building. She also learned that the woman's name was Sophie Miller, Mark's assistant. The same name that appeared in the lawyer's letter. It made everything clearer. He wasn't just having an affair. He was preparing to replace her completely. Claire began recording conversations where Mark slipped up, saving emails she found on the shared computer, and making copies of financial documents he thought she didn't understand. Every secret he kept only pushed her to gather more proof. Mark, blind with arrogance, thought he had full control. He believed Claire was too naive to notice or too weak to act. But he didn't realize that every lie he told was giving her strength. She wasn't planning a scene or a confrontation. She was planning for the day when he'd finally face the consequences of what he had done. A few months later, Claire got a call from their lawyer's office asking her to sign some routine papers. It sounded normal, so she went. But when she arrived, the lawyer looked uncomfortable. He hesitated before handing her a folder and said, "Mark asked me to update his will. I thought you knew." Confused, Claire opened the file, and her hands began to shake. Every page carried Mark's signature, and every asset they had built together was listed under one name, Sophie Miller. The house, their joint investments, the cars, even the jewelry Mark had once gifted Claire. All of it was left to Sophie. There wasn't a single mention of Claire anywhere. The lawyer apologized softly, saying he assumed she was aware of the changes. But Claire stayed silent. Her throat felt tight, and her mind went blank. She thanked him, took the papers, and drove home without saying a word. Once inside, she sat on the couch, staring at the wall for hours. 20 years of her life, erased with a few signatures. When Mark came home that night, she was waiting. Her voice was calm when she asked, "Did you really rewrite the will?" He didn't even try to deny it. He smirked and said, "Yes, I did. You don't have to worry about it. You'll be fine." But she pressed further, asking why he did it. That's when he laughed. Not the kind of laugh that hides guilt, but the cruel kind that comes from arrogance. "You didn't earn any of it, Claire," he said coldly. "You were just the woman who kept the house running. I made the money. I built everything. You should be grateful I let you live comfortably this long." His words cut through her like a knife. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to ask how the man she had loved for half her life could be so heartless. But instead, she stood still, staring at him with quiet disbelief. Then she took a slow breath, forcing a small, controlled smile. "We'll see about that," she said softly before walking away. Mark didn't take her seriously. He rolled his eyes and poured himself a drink, already dismissing her from his thoughts. To him, she was powerless, a woman who had no income of her own and no influence over his wealth. But what he didn't know was that Claire had already seen what kind of man he was, and she wasn't planning to let him win this time. That night, after he fell asleep, she sat by the kitchen table, staring at the signed will. She didn't cry anymore. She was too tired for that. Instead, she began to think, calmly, logically, and with purpose. She realized that if Mark was willing to erase her, then she had nothing left to lose. The betrayal had been cruel, but it also gave her clarity. He thought she was weak, but he was about to find out just how wrong he was. After that night, Claire changed completely, but not in a way Mark could notice. She stopped asking questions and stopped reacting to his coldness. She became calm, quiet, and almost gentle. Every morning, she made his coffee, kissed his cheek, and asked about his day like nothing had happened. At family dinners, she smiled, laughed at his stories, and played the role of a devoted wife perfectly. Mark, full of pride, believed she had accepted her place. He thought he had broken her spirit. But in reality, Claire was already planning her next move. She knew yelling or begging would get her nowhere. Mark's ego was too big, and his heart was too cruel. So she decided to be smart. She needed proof, not just of his betrayal, but of his crimes. One afternoon, when Mark left for a meeting, Claire looked through his study. She found receipts, signed papers, and several documents from foreign banks with names she didn't recognize. The numbers were large, much larger than what he ever declared. She didn't fully understand what it meant, but she knew she needed help. A week later, she met Eli Grant, a quiet and professional private investigator recommended by an old friend. She didn't tell Eli everything at first, only that she suspected her husband was hiding money. Eli agreed to look into it, and within days he returned with shocking results. Mark had multiple offshore accounts under false company names. He had been moving money secretly for years, hiding it from both Claire and the government. Some of the signatures on his company's financial papers were forged, even one with Claire's name. When Eli showed her the evidence, Claire felt a mix of anger and satisfaction. All this time, while she was being treated like a burden, Mark had been breaking laws to protect his fortune. The man who said she didn't earn anything had used her name illegally to cover his tracks. That changed everything. Claire realized she finally had real power, not emotional but legal. Eli advised her to stay quiet and keep collecting evidence. So she did. Whenever Mark went away, she copied files, took photos, and stored everything in a hidden folder on a small USB drive. She even found emails between Mark and Sophie discussing how to finalize the paperwork once she was gone. Each message made her colder, stronger, and more determined. At home, she continued to act like the loving wife. She made sure Mark believed everything was back to normal. He was so busy with Sophie and his secret accounts that he didn't notice the small changes, like how Claire never argued anymore, or how she kept a second phone hidden in her sewing drawer. By the time Eli finished his investigation, Claire had everything she needed. Mark thought he had erased her completely, but she had gathered enough proof to destroy him if she wanted. And as she watched him leave for another business trip, she whispered to herself, "You took everything from me, Mark. But now, I have something you'll never get back, control." Mark's health started to decline faster than anyone expected. Years of ignoring his doctor's warnings finally caught up with him. One night, he collapsed in his office, and Claire was the one who called the ambulance. She stayed by his side at the hospital, even when he refused to look at her. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to walk away, not yet. But when he came home from the hospital, things took a darker turn. Sophie moved into the house almost immediately after his discharge. She said it was to help take care of him, but everyone could see she was there for control. She started giving instructions to the house staff, rearranging furniture, and acting like she owned the place. Claire watched silently as Sophie took over her life piece by piece. Within days, Sophie had changed the locks on Claire's dressing room, replaced family photos, and even threw out Claire's old clothes under the excuse of clearing space. The final humiliation came when Claire walked into the master bedroom and found Sophie lying on the bed she had shared with Mark for 2 decades. Mark didn't look guilty. He simply said, "You should start packing, Claire. It's time for you to move on. I'll make sure you get a small allowance until the end of the year." His tone was cold and dismissive, as if she were just another piece of furniture being replaced. Claire stood there quietly, her heart heavy but her face calm. She didn't argue, didn't cry, and didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She simply nodded and walked out. That night, after everyone went to bed, she packed her belongings carefully. She didn't take much, just her clothes, a few photos, and a small wooden box of personal memories. But before she left, she went into Mark's office one last time. Inside, she found the locked drawer where he kept all his documents. She had already learned how to open it weeks earlier. One by one, she copied every file, every contract, every account statement onto her USB drive. She double-checked the folders, making sure nothing important was left behind. The evidence she now held was enough to expose not only his betrayal, but also the fraud he had built his empire on. When the sun started to rise, Claire took one last look around the house. Every corner held memories, good and bad, but none worth staying for. She walked quietly down the stairs, her suitcase rolling softly behind her. Sophie's voice echoed faintly from the kitchen, laughing at something Mark had said. Claire didn't stop to listen. She walked out the front door without saying goodbye. As she stood at the gate, she looked back once. The house no longer felt like hers, and for the first time in years, that realization didn't hurt. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on her bag, and left with her head held high. She had lost everything he thought mattered, but in truth, she was walking away with the only thing that could end them both, the truth. Months passed quietly after Claire left the house. She rented a small apartment near the coast and tried to rebuild her life piece by piece. Some days were peaceful, others lonely, but she never looked back. She found small comfort in the simplicity of her new world, the sound of waves, her morning walks, and the freedom of being far from Mark's shadow. She hadn't heard from him or Sophie since she walked out, and she didn't want to. The only reminder of her old life sat inside a locked drawer, the small USB drive holding every secret Mark thought he had hidden. Then one gray morning, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something in her gut told her to answer. "Mrs. Thompson," the voice said. It was Mr. Allen, the family lawyer. His tone was formal but uncertain, as if he wasn't sure how to begin. After a short pause, he finally said, "I'm sorry to inform you that Mark passed away last night." For a moment, Claire didn't speak. She felt nothing. No anger, no relief, no sadness, just emptiness. She thanked him quietly and waited for him to continue. He explained that Mark's will was scheduled to be read the following Monday, and that her presence was required. "It might be in your best interest to attend," he added softly. "There are things you'll want to hear." His voice carried a hint of warning, or maybe curiosity, but Claire didn't ask for detail. She simply said, "I'll be there." When the call ended, Claire sat for a long time staring at the ocean through her window. So it was finally over. The man who had tried to erase her from his life was gone, but the story wasn't finished yet. She knew exactly what kind of people would be there at the will reading. Sophie, pretending to be the grieving widow, Mark's relatives, circling like vultures, and the same lawyer who had once handed her the papers that erased her name. They would expect her to appear broken, humiliated, forgotten. But they had no idea what she carried with her. Over the next few days, Claire went through her files again. She reviewed every document, every recording, every transfer that linked Mark to his illegal dealing. Nothing had changed. Everything was still there, waiting to be used. She didn't plan to destroy anyone. She only wanted the truth to come out. For once, she wanted justice. Not the kind that came from anger, but from honesty. On Monday morning, she dressed carefully in a simple black dress. She didn't want to draw attention, but she wanted to look composed, calm, and unshaken. As she locked her apartment and picked up her bag, she slipped the USB drive inside. When she arrived at the law office, she paused outside the door for a moment. Through the glass, she could see Sophie sitting confidently beside Mark's brother, both of them smiling. Claire took a deep breath. She wasn't nervous, she was ready. Whatever was waiting on the other side of that door, she knew one thing for sure. This time, she held the power. The moment Claire stepped into the conference room, she could feel the tension hanging in the air. Everyone was already seated: Mark's brother, his sister, a few distant cousins, and of course Sophie. Dressed in black, Sophie sat close to the lawyer's desk, her hand resting on a folder as if she already knew its content. She looked confident, almost proud, like a woman who believed she had finally secured everything she wanted. Claire took a quiet seat at the far end of the table. Nobody greeted her. A few eyes turned briefly, judging, whispering, then moved away. Mr. Allen, the lawyer, cleared his throat and began the reading. His voice was steady, but Claire noticed his unease. He read through the legal formalities before reaching the part everyone was waiting for. As per the wishes of the deceased Mark Thompson, he said, the following assets will be distributed. The list went on: the family home, the vehicles, the business shares, and multiple investment accounts. Every single item was left to Sophie Miller. A few relatives exchanged shocked glances, whispering under their breath. Some looked uncomfortable, while others simply watched Sophie with quiet envy. Sophie, on the other hand, leaned back in her chair, her smile faint but unmistakable. When the lawyer finally finished the last line, she exhaled softly, as if claiming victory. Then Mr. Allen hesitated. His tone shifted as he said, "However, before we proceed with the confirmation of this will, I've received an addendum submitted by Mrs. Claire Thompson." The room went silent. Every head turned toward Claire. Sophie's smile faltered. Claire stood up slowly, her expression calm and steady. She walked toward the lawyer's desk and placed a sealed envelope in front of him. "Please include this in the estate review," she said quietly. Mr. Allen opened the envelope, and as he began reading through the contents, his face tightened. His professional tone faded into quiet disbelief. He flipped through several printed pages, scanned the attached documents, and then looked directly at Sophie. Inside the folder were detailed records, proof of hidden offshore accounts, forged documents, and fraudulent financial transfers, all signed by Mark and Sophie. Claire had kept everything carefully organized. Every signature, every transaction, every date matched perfectly. The evidence was undeniable. "What is this?" Sophie snapped, her voice breaking the silence. Mr. Allen adjusted his glasses and replied, "These are records of financial misconduct involving your name and the deceased's company. If these documents are verified, this will cannot be executed until further legal investigation." The room erupted in murmurs. Mark's relatives turned to each other, whispering, some staring at Sophie with shock, others with disgust. Sophie's face went pale. "This is ridiculous. She's lying," she shouted, but her voice shook with panic. Claire didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "Everything you see there is real. The signatures, the accounts, I made sure of it." Then she sat down, her expression composed. Mr. Allen gathered the documents, his tone now formal and cold. "Until these matters are cleared with the IRS and financial authorities, all assets are to be frozen. No one can claim ownership at this time." The silence that followed was heavy. Sophie's earlier confidence was gone. She sat frozen, her hands trembling. Claire didn't look at her again. She just folded her hands neatly on her lap and waited. The power that once belonged to Mark and Sophie had finally shifted, quietly, cleanly, and without a single raised voice. The air in the room grew heavier as Mr. Allen continued reviewing the documents Claire had submitted. Every few seconds, he glanced up from the papers, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. The relatives, still murmuring among themselves, fell silent when he finally placed the last page down and folded his hands on the desk. His voice was calm, but the weight in his tone caught everyone's attention. "It seems," he began carefully, "that there are significant financial irregularities tied to Mr. Thompson's estate." He paused, then looked directly at Sophie. These transactions appear to involve offshore accounts, unreported income, and falsified documents. The signatures show clear collaboration between Mr. Thompson and you, Ms. Miller. Sophie's face turned pale. That's not true, she stammered. He handled everything. I didn't. But before she could finish, Mr. Allen raised a hand gently, his professionalism steady. Ms. Miller, these records have already been forwarded to the Internal Revenue Service. There is an active investigation underway, initiated several months ago by an anonymous source. Claire didn't say a word. She just sat still, her eyes steady on the lawyer. Inside, her heart beat slowly and evenly. She had started that investigation months ago, knowing this moment would come. Mr. Allen continued. Because of the investigation, all of Mr. Thompson's assets are now under federal review and officially frozen until further notice. This means the will cannot be executed. No transfers, no ownership claims, and no payouts are permitted at this time. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie's earlier confidence vanished completely. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "You can't do this. He wanted me to have everything." Claire finally spoke, her voice low but clear. "Maybe he did. But he also broke the law while we were still married. That means I'm still legally tied to everything he did." She turned her gaze toward the lawyer. "Isn't that right, Mr. Allen?" He nodded slowly. "Legally, Mrs. Thompson is correct. As the spouse at the time of these actions, she retains rights to the protected marital assets, the portions of the estate that cannot be seized without her consent. Until the investigation concludes, those assets remain under her protection." Sophie looked at Claire in disbelief. "You planned this," she whispered bitterly. Claire didn't deny it. She just met Sophie's stare with quiet strength. "I planned to survive," she said simply. The relatives avoided eye contact, some shifting uncomfortably, others smirking faintly as they realized the balance of power had changed. Mr. Allen closed the folder and said, "Until further notice, no part of this estate will be distributed. Mrs. Thompson, you will be contacted as the legal spouse for cooperation with the investigation." Sophie's voice cracked. "So, what happens to me?" Mr. Allen didn't look up. "At this point, Ms. Miller, you have no legal claim." The words landed like a final blow. Sophie sank back in her chair, her face drained of color. Claire stood quietly, gathering her purse, her calm demeanor never breaking. As she walked toward the door, she turned slightly and said, "You both took everything from me once. I just took back what was mine." Then she left, leaving the room in stunned silence, her footsteps the only sound echoing behind her. After the will reading and the revelation of the fraudulent accounts, the aftermath was swift and decisive. Sophie was immediately called in for questioning by both the authorities and Mark's legal representative. Her involvement in the illegal financial activities became clear, and she struggled to defend herself. Mark's relatives, who had once supported her, turned against her almost overnight. They realized that she had been complicit and that her claim to the estate was worthless. Whispers and harsh looks followed her wherever she went, and the once confident woman now looked small and vulnerable. The mansion that had been Claire's home for decades was seized. Every asset, every bank account, and every hidden investment Mark had tried to keep secret was frozen. The government redirected the funds to cover back taxes and debts that Mark had accumulated through his fraudulent scheme. For the first time in years, the life Claire had been pushed out of was being unraveled without her even needing to take an active role. She had planned carefully, and now the truth was taking care of the rest. Despite the dramatic shift, Claire didn't feel the need to celebrate. There was no joy in seeing others fall, only the quiet satisfaction of justice finally taking its course. She understood that revenge isn't about anger. It's about restoring balance and reclaiming what's rightfully yours. With the mansion gone and Sophie defeated, Claire finally returned to her own space, the small beach cottage she had purchased years earlier with her own saving. It wasn't extravagant, and it didn't carry the weight of Mark's life, but it was hers. Every corner reflected her choices, her independence, and her freedom. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. No one could take it away from her, no one could erase her existence, and no one could threaten her peace. Claire spent her days walking along the beach, listening to the waves, and slowly rebuilding her life. She found joy in small things, making coffee in the morning, reading by the window, and tending to the small garden she had planted outside. She felt lighter, as if the weight of the past 20 years had finally lifted. She also began reconnecting with old friends she had lost touch with, people who had once admired her resilience, but never fully understood the struggles she endured at home. They welcomed her back with open arms, and for the first time in years, she felt truly supported. Claire knew that the legal battle wasn't over. The authorities were still reviewing the estate and the fraudulent accounts, but she no longer felt anxiety or fear. She had done what she could, collected evidence, exposed the crimes, and protected her rights. Everything else would unfold naturally. Sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the ocean, Claire realized something powerful. She hadn't just survived. She had reclaimed herself. The betrayal, the lies, and the years of being pushed aside had all led her to this moment. She didn't need anyone else's approval or wealth. She had her dignity, her peace, and the life she had built for herself. And that was more than enough. Claire sat on the wooden deck of her small beach cottage, her feet bare and toes brushing the warm sand. The ocean stretched out before her, endless and calm, with waves rolling gently toward the shore. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. The storms of the past, Mark's betrayal, Sophie's intrusion, and the chaos of the estate were all behind her. She had survived it all, and more importantly, she had emerged stronger. She remembered the nights when she had cried quietly in the darkness, when the thought of losing everything had felt unbearable. She remembered the anger that had burned inside her, the moments when she had wanted to scream or lash out. But now, none of that seemed necessary. The satisfaction of having the truth revealed, the law on her side, and the knowledge that she had acted with patience and dignity was far more powerful than any act of revenge could have been. Looking back, Claire realized that everything Mark had tried to take from her, her home, her security, her peace of mind, had only taught her resilience. Every secret she uncovered, every careful step she took, and every moment she waited patiently had built her into a woman who could handle anything life threw at her. The betrayal had broken her once, yes, but it had also reshaped her. She no longer needed anyone else to validate her worth. The cottage, small but hers, was a symbol of her independence. Each corner reflected her choices. The soft blanket on the couch she had picked herself, the little bookshelf she had filled with novels that comforted her, and the garden she had nurtured every morning. These things were simple, but they carried a quiet power. They reminded her that her life didn't need someone else's approval to be complete. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sound of the wave. She could hear the distant calls of seagulls and the soft rustling of palm leaves in the wind. It was a world untouched by greed or betrayal, a world where she could simply be herself. She let a slow smile form on her lips, a smile not of triumph over others, but of triumph over circumstance. "He tried to erase me," she whispered, "but I was the only thing holding it all together." She felt no bitterness, no desire for payback. Instead, there was clarity and a quiet strength she had never felt before. The truth had set her free, patience had guided her, and her dignity had carried her through the darkest moments. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light across the water, Claire felt a profound sense of completion. She didn't need wealth or validation from others. She had her freedom, her peace, and a life she could call her own. In that moment, she understood that real victory wasn't about hurting those who wronged her. It was about reclaiming herself. And with that thought, she leaned back, letting the ocean breeze wash over her, finally at peace.